Great. Hi everyone, my name is Jess Walton and I'm hosting the Opportunities for Writers webinar today as part of the Writers Victoria Rideability program. I'll be drinking coffee throughout the webinar today because I've been up with a heaving 18-month-old last night, so bear with me. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm speaking to you today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and pay my respects to elders past and present. Before I get started on this webinar, I just wanted to make sure that everyone knew about previous Rideability webinars which are still available to watch. You can find them on YouTube or through the Writers Victoria website. One of them is Path to Publication by Finley, which discusses how emerging and established writers can get published and pitch their work, write the personal and political, cope with trolling and connect to other writers. So I would highly recommend that you do have a look at that webinar. The other one that you can find on YouTube is one that I ran for Writers Victoria called Our Bodies, Our Stories. And that was a discussion about writing about the body. So if you're interested in that, then maybe go and have a look at that as well. The other thing I wanted to let you know about before we get started, this is an opportunity, but it's also a bit of a PSA for disabled writers, is that on March 23rd at 1 p.m, Arts Access Victoria are running a session on art, the NDIS and you. And it talks about how to advocate for the arts in your NDIS plan. So if that's something that you would find useful, then jump on their website and register for that. They also have resources like a planning guide called Art and You, which is written by and for people with mental health issues, and that helps articulate your needs and rights as an artist to NDIS planners. And so if you're feeling intimidated about the NDIS, if it hasn't rolled out in your area, which is the case for me, then having a look at those kinds of resources and attending information sessions might be really helpful for you. So the first thing that I wanted to talk about in terms of opportunities is the biggest opportunity that I've had as a writer and as a disabled writer, the Rideability Fellowship run by Writers Victoria. It's been an amazing program. So I'll talk a little bit about what it is, about what I did as part of the Rideability program, what others have done, just to give you an idea of the kinds of projects that have been selected, and some information on how to apply. So I'm hoping that all of you can see the Rideability Fellowship application form from last year up on your screen. If someone could just let me know if they can't see that, just so I know to kind of rejig the screen a little so you can see that, that would be great. So the Rideability Fellowship is awarded to 5 emerging artists with disability each year. You can receive mentoring as part of the fellowship, or a manuscript assessment, or you can do what I did and get free attendance at workshops run by Writers Victoria. So I was able to attend a range of workshops. Some of them were online clinics, so that means an ongoing kind of workshop. And online clinics were really helpful for me because it gave me some time to work on things like my poetry, because it wasn't kind of one set time. You could submit it when you needed to and look at the feedback when you needed to. And also, as someone with chronic pain and a parent of 2 young children, it was, a really flexible way to do a course, and it meant that even if I was having a bad pain day, I could still participate. Whereas if I was enrolled in a workshop in the city and I was having a bad pain day, I might not be able to attend. I was lucky though to be able to go into some of the workshops in the city as well. I have trouble with train trips, so I just had to make sure I had my self-care plan in place. And so I did some workshops here in the city. One was on performance poetry, which was definitely outside of my comfort zone. So that was an amazing thing to kind of get up and practice performing poetry. And poetry is something I haven't done since I was a teenager. When I was 16, I won an international poetry competition run by the Vatican, of all things. I was going to a Catholic school at the time, and I was encouraged to write a piece for this competition. And yeah, and somehow won this trip to Rome and met the Pope, and it was quite an interesting. Are we not? Alex is just helping me with my screen here.
Hi everyone, sorry.
We're having issues with people seeing me.
Yeah, sorry.
Okay, so I'll just keep talking. So the this international poetry competition, you know, kind of gave me a boost in terms of poetry writing as a teenager, but then a careers advisor, and believe me, if you work in careers counselling in high schools, never ever say this to a student. A careers advisor said to me, there's no career in creative writing, there's no point doing it at university, don't bother studying it, you know, do something that will lead to a real job, and creative writing can be a hobby. You know, and it's true that it can be, you know, tricky sometimes making money as a writer, but I think that was really discouraging, and right at a point where I should have been going to uni and learning how to write poetry and short stories and that sort of thing, I was really discouraged and ended up going into journalism, which wasn't for me. So anyway, the Writers Victoria Rideability Fellowship gave me a chance to jump back into poetry, you know, decades later, and really explore it and enjoy it. That's the beauty of this fellowship, is it's open to emerging and early career writers. So if you're, you know, as someone who was a published picture book writer, I've got one picture book published. I really wanted to explore poetry, but I just didn't feel confident enough to do that, and I didn't know how I was ever going to afford, you know, courses or, you know, a university course or anything like that around creative writing. And so this gave me the chance to do some of those workshops at Writers Victoria. So that was a real life-changing experience for me, and I now have a lot more confidence with poetry, and also I did a short story clinic, so I'm feeling a bit more confident about short story writing. And I'll talk a little bit about what I did as part of my project and what it led to in a moment. But basically, have a think when you're applying about whether you would benefit most from a mentorship. If you have a completed manuscript, then a manuscript assessment might be more for you. Or if you're wanting to kind of do some professional development and maybe learn about a new form, then the courses might be the way to go. So some of the other people who got a Rideability Fellowship last year are Mary Borsellino, writing a dark fantasy queer YA about a lesbian teen witch with physical disabilities who falls for her rival Azura, who is bi. So as a bi-disabled person, that was very exciting for me. I didn't have those kinds of books around when I was a teen, so to hear about those two things being coming together in these characters is very exciting for me. So I'm looking forward to reading that. Sonia Marcon writing biography about her journey from not having multiple sclerosis to having it. So I'm looking forward again to reading that work. Fiona Murphy for a collection of personal essays about learning Auslan, disability pride and deaf culture. So that kind of hopefully gives you a sense of some of the things that are that people are doing as part of their Rideability Fellowship. So it kind of depends on what you're wanting to do as an emerging writer. So just apply. Previous fellows also include Jackie Brown and Carey Finley, who I'm sure you've heard of. Carey has recently signed a book deal. So obviously things like the Rideability Fellowship can help people to kind of give them a confidence boost and get them kind of doing something that they wouldn't normally have access to through Writers Victoria. My project, originally I thought it was going to be around a whole lot of different genres and forms, but in the end it kind of focused in on poetry. So I started out by reading a collection of poetry anthologies, so 3 anthologies, a UK anthology, a US anthology and an Australian anthology, all included disabled poets and writers. And that was just amazing because I had never read so many pieces of writing by disabled writers in my life. So I immersed myself in kind of my community and felt so connected and felt like I was kind of about to write into a landscape that I was more familiar with. So that was amazing to have that time. Then I did while I was reading those anthologies, I did the courses in short story writing and poetry writing. And then I started a research project after I finished the courses. So I got these giant A2 posters, about 8 of them, I think, and glued them all together and started collecting bits from the 3 anthologies, things that had jumped out and spoken to me, and stuck them onto the poster and drew connections between them where I saw connections. did some illustrations, put some of my own writing in around and between those quotes, and also found some theory that kind of fit in with how I was feeling about my practice and about those other poems and about my writing. So I just basically spent a couple of months just really thinking through exactly what I was reading and what I then wanted to write. And doing that project really clarified what I wanted to write about, and it allowed me to I guess, respond to my peers in the disabled writing community through my writing. So that was very exciting. And then I started my period of writing. I was writing short stories and poems mainly. I also tried some letter writing. In the end, I decided that poetry was kind of the main focus, and I then started a zine making project. So I created 2 zines. One was a single poem, and the other one was a collection of poetry about cancer, amputation, disability, and chronic pain. And I worked with a local Melbourne artist, Rose Morgan, who, because I can't illustrate, well, I can, but it's not my strength. So I wanted to work with another artist to create this zine, and that was just an incredible process. And then I got to go into Sticky Institute in Melbourne. It's under Flinders Street Station, and deliver some copies of my zine to go on their shelf. And I also went to a zine fair, and my zines were sold on a table. So that was an incredible experience. I'd never made a zine before, and so this fellowship kind of took me to places I never imagined I would go, including a zine fair with a zine that I'd made. The other thing that I did as part of, the other thing that came from this fellowship was that I started a Patreon. I know that, I found Patreon quite confusing and intimidating before I started one. I didn't really understand how it worked. I didn't understand how you actually got people, to pay you money for writing poetry if you're an early career poet. I just thought, no, I don't belong on there. But the Rideability Fellowship kind of gave me the impetus to go and research Patreon, look at other creators, look at what they were doing, and then set up my own Patreon. And in the end, what I found was that, if I talked to people about why I was doing the Patreon and about the fellowship itself and about the fact that I was kind of trying to emerge into a new form, that people were very supportive of that, and that I did manage to get some patrons through my Patreon. And initially I set it up just for the period of the fellowship, but my patrons decided that they wanted to keep supporting me after the fellowship had finished. Okay, we're just going to sort out some text, so we're going to pause for a few minutes. So I'll just pause my screen for a moment. Okay, can everyone hear me now? We've had some technical difficulties. Oh, good. I'm getting, apparently you can hear me now. So I've had some technical difficulties this morning. So I've been speaking for about 15-20 minutes. I'm just trying to work out whether or not anyone has heard what I've been saying for that 15-20 minutes. So if you could let me know through the comments, that would be amazing. If no one's been hearing it, then what I'll do is go back to the start of the presentation, and we'll go from there. Okay, so it sounds like no one has seen or heard anything yet. So we'll go back to the start. So I've just been talking to myself. I've had a bit of a practice run. I'm sorry about the delay, everyone. So let me just go back to the start of my notes. Okay. So first of all, my name is Jess Walton. I'm hosting the Opportunities for Writers webinar today as part of the Writers Victoria Rideability program. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which I'm speaking to you today, the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation, and I pay my respects to elders past and present. Before I do get started, I wanted to point you in the direction of a couple of webinars which are already available for you to watch as well. I think they're really amazing resources, and hopefully all of you will log on to either the Writers Victoria website or YouTube to have a look at them. One of them is Path to Publication by Finley. Carey is a previous Rideability Fellow and has recently signed a book deal. She's got a book coming out very soon, which I'm incredibly excited about. And as part of that webinar, she discusses how emerging and established writers can get published, pitch their work, write the personal and political, cope with trolling, and connect to others in the writing community. Okay, so apparently we've just had a group of people log in, so I'm just going to go through the name of the presentation again. So my name is Jess Walton. I'm hosting the Opportunities for Writers webinar as part of the Writers Victoria Rideability program. And I was just going through some of the other webinars which are available through the Rideability program online. One of them is Path to Publication by Finley. So Path to Publication, Carey talks about pitching to the media. That was something I found really helpful during that webinar. Suggestions for good media outlets to approach and good publications to approach. Carey talked about having an online presence, which I agree is really important as a writer. She recommended joining disabled and chronically ill writers, that group, on Facebook. That's something that I found very useful. I'm not on Facebook very often. I'm more of a Twitter person, but when I am on Facebook, I often go and have a look at that group just to have that feeling of community and support from other disabled writers and to get a sense of what other people are doing. The other thing that's really useful on Facebook is the Disability Visibility Project run by Alice Wong, who is a disability activist and writer based in the US. Through that site, you can get a lot of information about what other disabled writers are doing around the world. So I would highly recommend following the Disability Visibility Project on Facebook and also on Twitter. And also you can follow Alice Wong on Twitter as well. And it is really important, I think, to network with other disabled writers on social media. I only joined Twitter a couple of years ago when I wrote Introducing Teddy. My agent said, you know, it would be good for you to be on one more platform in addition to Facebook. So I thought, well, I'll give Twitter a go. I'm, not great at taking photos. So Instagram, I was like, no, I don't think I'll go on Instagram. I've since learned that Instagram is a really amazing place to be as well as a writer, and there's an amazing book community on Instagram. So yeah, one of the things that Carey talks about is showing up and finding your audience and building an audience. And definitely, if you're looking for an audience, then social media is the way to go. Is one way to go. But the other thing that I have found really useful about being on social media is that those connections mean that I feel less alone as a writer. So it's important to kind of show up for other writers because you want them to show up for you as well. And so having that community online and in real life, so things like going to other writers' book launches if you can, and talking to them face to face as well about the shared struggles that you might have as writers can be really comforting, really helpful, and yeah, it basically, if you support them, then often you'll find that people will then come to your book launches and help you out with promoting your book on social media as well. So it is, it's a strategic thing, but it's also just a really good, lovely thing to take part in. And it has been really helpful to me at times where I felt very discouraged about a piece of work that I'm working on, or something that hasn't quite gone right, or when I'm struggling to know how to do an application for something. So get onto social media if you can and connect with other writers, and also if you can connect with them in real life. Offline, I should say, because social media is real life. Okay, I did this better the first time. Carey also talks about working for free and whether or not that's worth it. And I think that's really important to talk about, particularly for marginalised writers and disabled writers. The other webinar, which is online, is one that I ran for Writers Victoria called Our Bodies, Our Stories. And that's about, it's a discussion about writing the body and some strategies, kind of starting to do that. And that was something I was really interested in before I did my Rideability Fellowship, and talking about it in the webinar helped me to kind of clarify that that was what I wanted to do as part of my fellowship. So I'll talk a little bit about the Rideability Fellowship because I was one of the fellows for 2017. The Rideability Fellowships are offered to 5 emerging artists with disability. For 2018, Writers Victoria is still waiting on confirmation for funding, and they will provide information once they have confirmation that that's going ahead. The 5 emerging artists can choose from mentoring, having a manuscript assessment, or going to some workshops run by Writers Victoria for free. And that was the option that I chose, was the workshops. For a long time, I really wanted to go back to uni and study writing, or maybe do a course, and I just didn't have the funds available. And so this fellowship gave me the opportunity to explore poetry writing, which I was very interested in. I had loved writing poetry as a teenager, but a careers counsellor told me that there was no future in it, and so I'd given up creative writing and followed his suggestion to go into journalism, which wasn't for me at all. So as someone in my 30s who was interested in trying poetry, I felt, a lack of confidence, and I didn't really know where to start if I couldn't afford to do courses. And so what this did was give me that confidence boost. And I'll just talk a little bit about what I did as part of my fellowship. First of all, I started with reading work by other disabled writers. So I borrowed and bought some anthologies by disabled poets and writers, and just spent some time really understanding the landscape that I was about to start writing into. And getting ideas, because I think it is, as a disabled person, I didn't grow up reading a lot of writing by other disabled writers. And so it was hard to imagine what I might look like as a disabled writer, what my work might look like. So that was really important. And then I started the research phase. I made a huge poster of A2 sheets stuck together and started putting snippets of writing by other writers onto that poster that had spoken to me, and then drawing connections between them and making notes, drawing little illustrations, putting my own ideas and bits of my own writing onto the poster, and that it was basically a month-long brainstorm session, and that was an amazing process to go through. I did the courses at Writers Victoria. Some of them were online, which was really important to me as someone with chronic pain and as the parent of 2 young kids. My prosthetic leg and my chronic pain and, the normal kind of, kids getting sick or, that can mean that sometimes getting into the city, I live on the in the outer southeastern suburbs, so getting into the city can be quite tricky for me, and train travel can be very painful. So being able to do some of my courses online was really important. And some of those courses were clinics where you could submit your work when it suited you by the due date, and then read the feedback from the tutor when that suited you. So that was a really flexible way to learn about poetry writing and short story writing for me. They were the 2 forms that I ended up focusing on for my courses. Once I had done the courses, I had done the reading and the research, then I started the writing phase. And of course that started during the courses that I was doing online. They were called clinics. So if you have a look at the Writers Victoria website, there are online clinics, and they go over a number of weeks. And so you write during the clinic and submit it and then get feedback. So I did writing during the courses, and then once they were all done, I kept writing until I had some work that I was really happy with. In the end, I thought I would do a whole lot of, letter writing and maybe some essay writing and article writing. And in the end, it was the poetry and the short stories that really stuck. And the poetry in particular became a bit of a passion, and I decided to start a zine making stage of the project. So I'd never made a zine before, so I jumped online and had a look at how other people were making zines. I visited Sticky Institute in Melbourne, under Flinders Street Station, and had a look at the way that other people were creating zines. And then I started making my own, and I engaged a Melbourne artist, Rose Morgan, to collaborate with me on this zine. So that was an incredible process to go through. I'd collaborated on a picture book, but I had never imagined myself collaborating on a poetry zine. And that's something really beautiful and unexpected that came out of that fellowship project. The other thing I did was finally get up the confidence to start a Patreon. Some of you may be aware of Patreon. You might even be supporting other writers or be on there yourself as a writer. But I had never really thought of myself as being kind of good enough or having the right kind of content to engage people as patrons. And this fellowship gave me the confidence boost I needed to jump online and research how to do it. I set up a Patreon, which was supposed to be just for the length of the fellowship project. And it was asking people to support me so that I could, you know, find a little more space and time in my life for writing during the fellowship. And I was surprised at how many people were happy to do that and were keen to read what I was writing as part of my fellowship project. And at the end of the fellowship, I asked my patrons if they were keen to continue supporting me, and they said they were. And the income that I made from the Patreon, I used that to enroll in a poetry clinic, an online poetry clinic, which began after the fellowship. And what I'm doing is taking the poems that I wrote during the fellowship, the ones from my zine, and I'm now workshopping those as part of this online clinic. And I hope to make a kind of second edition of the zine, so kind of showing the evolution of these poems through this kind of process of learning. And so my patrons are really excited because they've seen the poems as they were during the fellowship, and now I'm kind of keeping them updated about how I'm going in the poetry course, and they're getting to see how those poems are changing. And all of my poems are about cancer, amputation, disability, and chronic pain. Some of them kind of intersect with my sexuality or with my parenting or both. So it's been a really great place to kind of work through some of my feelings around, particularly around my experiences with cancer and the trauma of that time. So some of my poems are quite gory, but my patrons don't seem to mind. So yeah, the Patreon has been an ongoing, very real, tangible kind of outcome for me from this fellowship, and that's very exciting. I still have the research poster up in my house, and I still look at it and use it to help me think of, you know, what I might like to work on. And I have my zines as well that I created as part of that fellowship. So I definitely recommend that all of you apply for the Rideability Fellowship when the information comes through about the 2018 fellowship, because it was life-changing for me, and it was definitely career-changing for me. And yeah, it has been incredible. I'll just quickly go through what some of the other Rideability Fellows from 2017 are working on. Mary Borsellino was working on a dark fantasy queer YA about a lesbian teen witch with physical disabilities who falls for her rival Azura, who is bi. So as a queer bisexual adult who never had books with people like me in them as a teenager, I was so excited to read about this project. Can't wait. And I love YA books. I read a lot of them. So that was, yeah, super exciting for me. Sonia Marcon is writing biography about her journey from not having MS to having it. And Fiona Murphy is writing a collection of personal essays about learning Auslan, disability pride, and deaf culture. I mentioned earlier that Finley is one of the previous fellows. Another previous fellow that you might know about is Jackie Brown. So Carey, Finley, and Jackie Brown are the two disabled writers who kind of helped me to identify as disabled, to be really proud about my disability identity, and so to be a Rideability Fellow in it, you know, having seen the work that they've produced as part of their fellowship and as writers was a real honour. I don't know whether you can see the Rideability Fellowship application form on your screen. If someone could let me know whether you can see that, that would be fantastic. I'll just have a look and see if anyone can, you know, in the comments. Oh, great. Okay, it looks like people can see it. So I just wanted to show you this. It may change for 2018, but I just wanted to show you what it looked like in 2017, so you can have a look at what kind of questions you need to answer and whether you might be interested in applying. I really do hope you all apply, and if you're you know, right at the beginning of your career as a writer, you know, or whether writing is your hobby or just a passion, you know, don't self-reject. put yourself forward for this, because even if you're right at the beginning, doing things like courses or a mentorship might be just the thing you need to kind of get you started as a writer. In 2017, entries closed on July 17th. It was an extended due date from July 10th. And the fellowship project needed to be completed by the 31st of December. So assuming that it happens again, that applications close around July again, you've got quite a bit of time between now and then to start thinking about what you might like to do as part of your fellowship. So on this form, it asks for your details, and then it asks for a title for your work, what type of work it is, so fiction, non-fiction, biography, poetry, etc. The genre and the description of your manuscript or writing project. And then finally, what would you want to achieve with a Rideability Fellowship? And then you need to attach a sample of your writing, and you can attach up to 1,000 words to the application. So for me, I attached some poems. I had, I think, 3 or 4 poems as part of my application. And it is interesting, when I went back and had a look at the poems that I included, after having done the fellowship for 6 months and then doing this extra online poetry course, I was amazed at how far I'd come. I'm not saying that my poetry now is any good, but I think I have improved as a poet. And I think that's partly about practice, and it's partly about all the reading and the research by other writers that I did during the fellowship project, and obviously the courses that I did. Being able to work with established writers as part of those courses was really valuable. And yeah, it might be hard to quantify day to day, but when I get to the end of my fellowship and look back on what I submitted as part of my application, I was pleasantly surprised. And then in my description, I talked about, how I wanted to write letters. I did write some letters. I looked at Stella Young's letter writing and tried to write similar kinds of letters to myself at different ages. And I submitted one for publication, and it wasn't accepted by the publication I submitted to, but that was a good process to go through. And I don't really think that letter writing is kind of my thing, but it was really personally quite important and powerful to write letters to myself at different ages, because I wasn't really aware of disability pride. I wasn't connected into the disability community. I didn't have role models and peers when I was younger, and so writing to 10-year-old me who had just become disabled and didn't really understand what that meant, and feeling very alone and isolated at the time, it was quite healing to write that letter to myself. And then I tried writing to my teenage self, as someone who was dealing with sexuality and trying to kind of come out, but also trying to work out what it meant to be disabled and to be a sexual person. That was a really interesting letter to write as well. And so if you're looking for a writing activity to do, I highly recommend some letter writing. It was really amazing. And some of the themes, even if those letters never see the light of day, some of those themes came through in the poetry and the short story writing that I did as part of my fellowship. I mentioned what I did with my poetry. The short stories that I wrote, I'm still workshopping the ones that I did during the clinics and courses, but it gave me the confidence to then write another short story, which has now been accepted into an anthology of short stories, which is going to be published this year. So that, again, is something I never would have considered doing before this fellowship. And so when I say it's been life-changing and career-changing, I really mean it. It has allowed me to branch out into other kinds of writing instead of just writing picture book after picture book, which I'm also trying to do. But this fellowship has kind of helped me to become a writer instead of a picture book writer, and I'm really grateful for that. So I hope you all apply for the Rideability Fellowship. I highly recommend it. And even if you just apply and get the feedback this year, if you're not successful in getting the fellowship this year, going through that process is really helpful. I'll talk a little bit about getting feedback when you don't get things like a fellowship or a grant a bit later. The other thing I wanted to let you know about is that the Rideability program There are other parts of Rideability apart from the fellowship. There are the webinars, obviously, and there are also some events that are run here. So I was able to go to a course run by Siobhan Plaza, an amazing YA writer, as part of that Rideability program, and so that was free for me to attend as a disabled writer. And so keep an eye out on their program for Rideability events. They also have a Rideability Goes Regional and Online program, so this is part of that, but it's a 3-year program to support aspiring writers with a disability who are living in regional Victoria. So each region of Victoria will get an Own Voices Why Writing Matters forum. One has just recently happened in Moe, which I heard was amazing, and then a series of 8 monthly writing groups. And I believe the Moe one is now booked out, the writing group. That was very popular. So yeah, so have a look at, if you're living in regional Victoria, have a look at when that's rolling out in your area. You might like to join the writing group. And that's rolling out in regions alongside the NDIS rolling out. And there was some information about arts and the NDIS as part of that Own Voices forum. I mentioned this the first time I started this webinar when you couldn't hear me. I'm just going to go back and talk about it briefly now. I don't think I have talked about it this time. Arts Access Victoria are running a session called Art, the NDIS and You on the 23rd of March. It talks about how to advocate for the arts in your NDIS plan, and they'll be running sessions like that on Fridays ongoing. I think it's the last Friday of each month, but just have a look on their website to confirm that. But there is one happening on March 23rd. They also have Art and You, a planning guide, which is a resource written by and for people with mental health issues, and that helps articulate your needs and rights as an artist to NDIS planners. So if you're a disabled writer and you're going into an NDIS planning meeting, you might like to include writing as part of your NDIS plan, and there are a range of ways that you can do that. So I highly recommend getting along to one of those sessions if you can. Okay, so I wanted to talk about some other opportunities. If anyone has any questions along the way, please feel free to send them, and I'll do my best to keep track of the questions here and answer them as I go. The next opportunity I wanted to talk about is the Dulcie Stone Writers Competition, which is run by Writers Victoria in partnership with Valid. Valid is the Victorian Advocacy League for Individuals with Disability. So it is open to people with intellectual disabilities who are living in Victoria, and it's for works up to 1,000 words or a storyboard of up to 3 A4 pages of drawing. So it can be either drawings or writing. So if you have an intellectual disability, or you know another writer with an intellectual disability who might like to enter this competition, it's a fantastic opportunity. This year the theme is Community, Here I Come. And the questions around that theme are: what gives life meaning and purpose, and what does a good life in the community look like? And the entries for that close on the 27th of April. And I'm just going to open the form for that one as well, because I think it's worth having a look at these and thinking about the kinds of questions that are on these forms. Hold on, let me just bring it a little so everyone can see it. Okay, so this is the application form. I will be sending through by email in about a week's time. Writers Victoria will send a handout that I'm creating with all of the information discussed during this webinar. And so there'll be links to things like the application forms that I'm showing during this webinar. So don't worry about, writing everything down really fast. It will all be in the handout that's sent out. So this writers competition, I just scroll down here. The information that you need to include is a title, some comments about your work, and then it explains that you need to have created the work, but it's okay if you've had support to enter the competition. So you email that through to Valid, or you can drop it into Valid. So, and that can be used in things like their newsletter and as promotional material. And there's some more information here about the award. They have an awards ceremony at Writers Victoria at the Wheeler Centre later in the year. And so winners are announced at the awards ceremony, and all entrants are published in an anthology as well. So yeah, so that's another important opportunity to mention, which is specific to disabled writers. So last year's winners, were Michael Chan, Victoria Marshall, Milan Sanders, Kathy Townsend, and Robbie Wales. The next opportunity that I'll talk about is not specific to disabled writers, but for all of these opportunities that I mentioned that aren't specific to us as disabled writers, what I want to say is please apply for them. Let's flood all of these fellowships and competitions with writing about disability or writing by disabled writers. Let's, take it all over. Let's, I want this to be the year of disabled writers kind of winning every damn competition and fellowship and grant that's out there to get. So I wanted to mention the Cat Muscat Fellowship. Applicants need to be age 16 to 30. So I would be ineligible for this one at the age of 33. I think I'm 33. Yeah, 33. And they also need to be female identifying or non-binary. Applications closed on 14th of January this year, so you've got lots of time to prepare for applying for this one. There's $3,000 of professional development up for grabs for an editorial project or a piece of writing. The 2016 recipient, Bree Lee, I wanted to read out this quote about how it changed her career. It helped me secure a literary agent, which led to me signing with Allen & Unwin. It allowed me to pay 2 mentors who helped me draft my manuscript. It changed the trajectory of my career. So, the Rideability Fellowship did that for me. The Cat Muscat Fellowship is obviously doing that for people too. So regardless of which opportunity you apply for, these are the kinds of things that as an emerging writer can really change the way that your career or your practice is going. I've got a question here. A writer is wondering, can writers working on film scripts apply to Rideability Fellowship? That's a good question. I'll have to get back to you on that one. I don't have an answer to that right now, but I will find that out for you. I'll just make a note of that because I'm not sure where your questions go when this closes. So it's the Rideability Fellowship and it's film scripts. That's a really good question. Okay. So I'll just go back to the Cat Muscat Fellowship for now. The 2017 recipient, Fury, writes that having a voice in my ear affirming, challenging and encouraging and guiding me has given me strength to develop faster and with more confidence as a writer. So again, it's all and having kind of the space and time to develop your practice and to develop work. The next opportunity I want to mention, unfortunately, the applications for this year closed just a few days ago on the 9th of March. So I was kind of hoping that when I initially was asked to do this webinar that we'd just get in time to encourage you all to apply. But regardless, I think it's something that every emerging writer in Victoria should be looking at. And I'd love to see, there's 20 fellowships each year, so I'd love to see a significant number of those going to disabled writers. So please consider applying for this. So put it in your diaries for March next year. What it gives you is 10 weeks of workspace in the Wheeler Centre and a $1,000 stipend. So, and you get $500 at the beginning and then $500 at the end. And one of the most important things is having that space to write, and you're sitting there with other emerging writers who are also working on their projects. So it's really great in terms of giving you that feeling of community, networking with other writers. No, I don't think there is a fee. Sorry, someone's just asked if there is a fee to apply. Sorry, and someone has asked what the name of the one I'm talking about now is. So I'll just go back to the start here. So the Wheeler Centre Hot Desk Fellowship is the one that I'm talking about right now. So that's run by the Wheeler Centre, as far as I'm aware, there's no fee to apply for this one. No, there is no fee for this one, and I didn't pay a fee for the Rideability Fellowship one either. I do have some where I've made note of a fee, so hopefully if there are some where there are, sorry, but I don't think there is for this one. So the Hot Desk Fellowship, there are 20 fellowships given each year. They are for different periods in the year though, so I've made a note of these dates. So what you're applying for is 10 weeks, either from April to July, July to September, or September to November, but all of the applications go in March. So have a think about what time of the year you would be able to kind of give most of your time to the fellowship for that 10 weeks. You don't have to be there for every day, but they encourage you obviously to be there as much as you can. So have a think about when would work best for you. And what's great about these fellowships is that as well as connecting in with other writers who are doing the fellowships, you also get to meet and network with the resident organisations at the Wheeler Centre. So Writers Victoria, the Melbourne Writers Fest, Emerging Writers Fest, Express Media, Australian Poetry, City of Literature, and there are a few others as well. So being able to kind of be around all of those organisations and meet and work with those people over that 10 weeks is a really amazing opportunity. And a lot of writers who do the Hot Desk Fellowships are approached by agents or publishers who are, keen on their work and who have heard about them through the fellowship. One of the reasons that they might have heard about them is that part of your work will get featured on the Wheeler Centre site. And in a special Hot Desk edition of the Next Big Thing series at the Wheeler Centre. So you kind of, as well as getting to work with other writers, getting to be around these resident orgs, getting $1,000 stipend, and having 10 weeks of workspace. At the Wheeler Centre, you also kind of get this platform online and through the Wheeler Centre events to kind of showcase your work and talk about your work and for people to kind of get to know you as a writer. So it is a really amazing opportunity, and for early emerging writers, I think it's the perfect thing to do to kind of dip your feet in the water of kind of grants and fellowships and opportunities. I think it's a really good place to start. And if you're applying for something like a grant and you're talking about what you've done before, then having something like a Hot Desk Fellowship or a Rideability Fellowship or a competition that you've entered in one would look really good on your application as well. So the next thing I wanted to mention, I know that I'm going through a lot here, but the fact is there's lots available and I've culled it down to what I think is a pretty short list, but I'm still going to mention a lot of different opportunities here. So just try and take in as much as you can. It'll be recorded so you can have a look online if you want to listen to it again, and you can have a look at the handout once that's sent out. The next one I want to talk about is the State Library Creative Fellowships. So this one is an interesting one because you again get space in an office at the State Library, which is an amazing place to work. There are 6 awarded, and the applications for this one close on the 22nd of April. So you've got just over a month if you do want to apply for this one. You get a grant of $15,000, so it's quite a significant grant. And it's for 3 months of research, and you need to explain how you would use the library's collections. So when you're applying for the Creative Fellowship online, there's an application form online. You need to give a project title, a summary of 200 words. That's not a lot of words. You need to spell out which collections and materials you'll use and how you'll use them. So you'll need to familiarise yourself with the collections at the library. You can jump online and have a look at what collections they have a think about which one would be most relevant to the work that you're producing. And then you need to talk about the community engagement and or creative outcome that would come from your work. So it might be, sorry, someone's just asked what this one is called again. I might be moving a little too quickly or speaking too fast, so just let me know if you'd like me to slow down a little bit. This one is the State Library Creative Fellowships. You need to jump online to the State Library website to have a read through the details for this one. I don't have the form here with me. I've just chosen a few of the application forms to go into more detail with. So this one you need to have a look at the website. But I did write down the things that they ask you in that form, and the main things are describing which collections and materials you'll use and how you use them. So you need to look at the library's collections. And how your work will engage the community or what creative outcome will come from your work. So again, having that space in a shared office, you get to build connections with other writers, you'd get to know the staff at the State Library, and you would get the help that they're able to provide to you as a writer while you're researching. So jump online and have a look at some of the previous winners of those fellowships, because there are some pretty interesting projects up there, really amazing stuff. And always, when you're looking at these opportunities, knowing what other writers have done can help you to imagine what you might be able to do with one of those opportunities. So they have a lot of information up on their site about previous winners, so I would go through and have a look at those winners throughout the years. Okay. So the next thing I'm going to talk about is grants. And this one, grants I found them incredibly intimidating to apply for. I don't know if you're the same way, but you know, people would talk to me about, you know, as someone who'd published a picture book, oh, you should apply for a grant to write your next picture book. And when I did my Rideability Fellowship, you know, people said, oh, you should, you know, apply for a grant from Australia Council or Creative Victoria to do extra writing in this area. And it just seemed so complicated and difficult, and I knew how many people were applying for those grants, and so I felt really intimidated. So a couple of times I started applications and then I just get too intimidated and give up. One of the best things that you can do is give yourself time to do your first application for a grant. Everyone's impulse is to leave it until the last minute. You know, you have the date in mind that it's due, or maybe you forget the date that it's due until the night before. And so people try to rush an application. And there's just so much that you need to include in your application. It is possible to do it, even as an emerging or early career writer, to apply for a grant, but you need to give yourself the time to make sure that you're including everything you need to include, and that you're putting forward the best application that you can. So the first one I thought I'd talk about is the copyright agency grant. This is one that I didn't know about for quite a while, because I had a look at the copyright agency website and noticed that their main grants, the Create grants, are for established and mid-career writers. And at the time, I didn't see the grant that was for, they're called the Ignite grant, which is open to all writers, so you don't need to be mid-career or established. So the Ignite grants, I actually think, I wish I'd seen them first, because I think it's probably a really good one to start with, because you're applying for amounts of up to $5,000. So it's a smaller amount than some of the other grants you can apply for. And they're really great for emerging writers. If you have a look at what they're for, you can apply for structured mentorships, residencies, participation in professional workshops that are relevant to your practice, courses, conferences, internships, and promotion opportunities for writers with overseas publishers. So if you're just starting out as a writer, then doing something like a structured mentorship, or participating in a professional workshop, or doing a course, you know, that could be just what you need at this stage of your career. So when I had a look at what kind of amounts people were asking for, there were people who were asking for something as small as $700 to do a mentorship. And I went and had a look at the Writers Victoria mentorships just to get a sense of what you could apply for if you wanted to do one of theirs. So through Writers Victoria, the initial meeting is $300, and then you pay $475 for 6 hours of ongoing mentoring after that initial meeting. So you could have a look at the application form for the Writers Victoria mentorships, or you could find another organisation who do mentorships. I think the Australian Society of Authors, ASA, also do mentorships as well. So you could find one of those organisations, have a look at how much their mentorships cost, have a think about whether you need a mentorship and whether that might be useful to you and who you would like to mentor you, and then apply for something like the Copyright Agency Ignite grant. So I had a look at their application process, and the sort of things you need to think about are how much money you'd need, when your project would start. So the next round, you need to apply by the 20th of April, so that, again, you've got a little bit more than a month. And it's for projects starting after the 1st of July. So you could choose a start date after the 1st of July, provide a project title, the location of your project, 50 words on your creative practice, 300 words on your project description, 200 words on how this would help your career development, and then 200 words on how it would benefit the creative community. So those are the kinds of questions you'll get as part of that application. So you could start having a think about that now, and then maybe in a week or two, open an application. It'd be great to start it now, actually, because I think having about a month to do this kind of application for the first time would be really useful. And there's lots more information about the kinds of supporting material that you would need to provide as well. So yeah, one of the most important things is getting on the website for each of these organisations and reading everything in detail, because they do put quite a bit of information up there to support writers. Okay, so that's the copyright agency. So I'm in the process of applying for a grant through the copyright agency Ignite grants right now. So I've just started mine. The sorts of support material that you might need are things like a CV, some letters of support or a confirmation of acceptance into a workshop or a course, and a draft program of the kinds of activities that you want to do, and of course the budget, which for me is always the most intimidating part of a grant application. I find budgeting really scary. I wish they taught more of it in school. And yeah, that's always the thing where I kind of feel stressed out. So make sure that whatever it is that you might have a bit of trouble with the grant application process, find the support you need early on so that when you have questions, you can, talk to people who have applied before. But of course, also you can contact the organisations themselves. And that's something that when you're first writing a grant application, you might feel a bit nervous about doing. The grants officers are very, very helpful, very friendly when you call. I've called the grants officers from Copyright Agency, Australia Council and Creative Victoria, and they're always happy to help. And with Creative Victoria, I think I rang 3 times for the one application, and they didn't get sick of me or send me away. They were always happy to help. So make sure that you're in contact with them if you have any questions. But before you call the grants officers, have a read through all of the information on the website. When you're applying for, let me have a look. Oh, before I move on to Australia Council and Creative Victoria, I just want to talk about the how many people applied for the Copyright Agency grants. So in May 2017, they reported that there were 70 applications for the Ignite grants. 8 were successful and 2 of the 8 were writers. So when I looked at how many people were applying for other kinds of grants, I thought, well, 70 applications isn't that much. Obviously, it's still very competitive, and obviously not all of the people chosen for the grants are writers. So, it's still, you can't expect to get a grant every time you apply, obviously. But I thought, well, I felt a little bit less intimidated when I looked at those numbers. So that there might be more applications this year, hopefully from all of you applying for mentorships and residencies and that sort of thing, and courses. And I've just chosen one example, a writer, Sharon Huber. She was given a grant to facilitate a mentorship with 2 mentors to support the final development and submission of a manuscript that is currently under contract by a publisher. So that's an example of a writer who has applied for one of those grants, and obviously they have a contract with the publisher, but you don't need to have that to apply for one of these grants. So that's an example of a mentorship. Sorry, have some of my coffee. I was up all night with an 18-month-old teething toddler, so I might try and drink some coffee, take some breaks and drink coffee, try and slow it down a little bit. Another successful applicant, I mentioned that I started a journalism course, and it wasn't for me, but one of the writers who applied for an Ignite grant through the Copyright Agency was Bianca Robinson, a science journalist, and Bianca received a grant to attend the World Federation of Science Journalists Biennial Conference in San Francisco in 2017. So I think that's pretty amazing. So in terms of imagining what might be possible for you applying for one of these grants, it might be that you're wanting to go to a conference that is relevant to your writing practice, and maybe it's in San Francisco. So have a think about the kinds of things you want to do. There are 2 ways to approach this. You can either think of exactly what you want to write and then try to find the grant that matches what you want to do, or you can just spend some time looking at the different grants that are available, what kinds of things they support, and then think, okay, is there anything that I might like to do that kind of fits into one of these grants? Someone has asked, what if your grant was not successful? That is a really good question, and I've actually got some feedback that I got from 2 unsuccessful grant applications, because I think, as embarrassing as it is for me to share that, I think it's really useful to know the kinds of things that, well, first of all, an unsuccessful grant application is a really good opportunity to learn more about grant writing. So grant writing is a skill, just like you might do a course in short story writing or poetry writing. Grant writing is quite tricky. Don't let that intimidate you, but it takes time and it's a very competitive process. And so, don't think of the first grant application as, if I don't get this, then I'll just stop applying for grants. Think of it as a process, as a skill that you're learning. and think of that feedback as being the most important thing about a rejection. So I've got here my Australia Council feedback. I'll just open that up. So the Australia Council sent their feedback by email, which was very handy. Whereas Creative Victoria, I'll just open that up as well. They provided feedback during a phone call. If you're getting feedback during a phone call, then please do write down that feedback as they're speaking, because you won't remember a lot of it. You'll be disappointed about not getting your grant. And of course, you probably won't think about that feedback all that much until you're thinking about applying for a grant again. So having it on file is really useful, so you can go back and refer to it the next time you want to apply for a grant. So they talked about the different selection criteria. It's really important to know the selection criteria. The first time I applied for grants, I didn't pay enough attention to that criteria. So they said that my application for a Creative Victoria Creators Fund grant was a self-devised professional development project. My budget was apparently realistic, so that was really good to know, because the budget was the thing I was most concerned about. They were happy that I'd provided previous work and letters of support, but my project timeline wasn't very good. So it needed to give them a better sense of what I would be doing and when. So I needed more detail in the project timeline. I needed to spend more time developing that. The impact on my practice was clear. So I was asking for time to work on some poetry and short story writing around disability and chronic pain, so similar to what I was doing during my Rideability Fellowship. They said it would have been a valuable contribution to the dialogue around disability, disease and pain. It was clearly about changing from writing for children to a different genre, but I needed to provide more information about the impact on the creative sector, how it could impact and influence that sector. So that was something I felt really confused about. So then I needed to go back and do some research into that criteria and what it meant. The last one was creative merit. They were happy with the sample of writing that I'd given. They thought that I was an early career writer in terms of poetry and short story writing. They liked my voice. They needed, the period of development was focused on craft, and they thought I should have broadened my aims and gone into more detail about the different genres and techniques I wanted to explore. So having these notes here, the next time I apply for a Creators Fund grant, will be really useful. So I'll talk a little bit about what you might be wondering, what is a Creators Fund grant? So I'll just go to my notes here on Creators Fund. On Creative Victoria and the different kinds of grants that they have. So Creative Victoria have two different kinds of grants, and for the upcoming round, which closes on the 26th of July, for projects starting after the 1st of January 2019, you have to choose between the Vic Arts grant and the Creators Fund grant. So the Vic Arts grant is for between $5,000 and $20,000. It's for creative development of new work. So if you have some work you're wanting to develop or begin, and it's also for national and international residencies, presentations and touring. There are a few other things that covers, but that's kind of the main thing. It's mainly around the creative development of new work. The Creators Fund is more about giving artists the time to develop. So it's for amounts between $20,000 and $50,000, and you're applying for funding for 3 to 6 months of intensive creative research or creative development. So it's more about, you know, when people need the time to kind of develop as an artist, the Creators Fund is giving them that time. You're expected to mainly focus on if you get this grant, you're expected not to do too much else in terms of work during that period. So you're kind of focused on this intense period of development. So you need to choose which one you'd be more suited to. I've got some information here about the Australia Council. Okay. When I talk about the Australia Council, I've got some examples of the amounts that people have applied for. That information is often available, how much people are being given for the grants. And I think that's useful in terms of getting a sense of how much you might like to apply for. Often when people are doing their first grant application, they apply for the smallest amount that's available because it's kind of a form of self-rejection. They feel like they're not good enough to apply for the upper amounts. It might be that you don't need the full amount that's available, but have a look at what other writers have been given in terms of funding. Have a think about what you need for your project, and then don't undersell yourself when you're applying for a grant, because there are people who are given kind of mid to upper amounts within that grant range as well. Also, Creative Victoria have these amazing, so I mentioned contacting the grants officers, that's really important. They also have these amazing drafting tools, and it really does take you through the whole application process. And for each question, it breaks down what kinds of things you need to cover. It also gives you a lot more detail on the supporting material that you need to provide. I could spend a full couple of hours just going through that drafting tool and how to use it, but I won't do that. It is quite straightforward. So if you're feeling intimidated about applying for a grant and having a look at those drafting tools, they even have a budget drafting tool, which is very useful for me. So if you're feeling intimidated, or if you're not sure how to start an application and you don't want to call the grants officers yet, then that might be a good place to start, is reading through what's on the website and then having a play with their drafting tools. Again, that was something that I didn't take the time to find out about the first time I applied for a grant, and it really showed in terms of how well I addressed the selection criteria in my first grant application. So yeah, taking the time to read through, maybe giving yourself a full week or two to look at it, and looking at it more than once to give it time to sink in is really important. And yeah, give yourself that space and time well before you start applying. So give yourself that week or two, because there's a lot of information there, and it does take a little while to kind of sink in. The Australia Council grants, looking at how we're going for time, we're running out of time. So what I won't go into detail with the Australia Council grants, but I will let you know that the Australia Council and Copyright Agency are running a video conference, so an online session like this one, called Funding Options and Grant Applications, on the 23rd of March, and you book it through the Australian Society of Authors. It's $15 for members and $25 for non-members, so you might not be able to do that, but if you can, if you're interested in applying for one of those grants, then particularly the Copyright Agency one we were talking about, where you can apply for quite small amounts, it might be a good way to start out writing grant applications. So going to a session like that could really help give you some more information. That's being run on the 23rd of March. How are we going for time? Have I got time? Yeah, I would like to continue. I've got a few more here that I'd like to talk about. I just have a look at the... I just wanted to show you quickly before we move on from grants. The Copyright Agency Ignite grant, when I had a look at their sample budget, I thought this is something, if there are other people out there who are a bit intimidated about applying for a grant, this is something that would be good to show them. So here is a sample budget that they provided. The Cultural Fund grant for $3,000 for a residency. The expenditure is airfare, $2,000, and the residency, $1,000. So the total amount for the income is the grant, sorry, the income is the grant, and the total amount is $3,000, and the expenditure is the airfare and residency with a total of $3,000. So that to me it does not look intimidating. It's quite encouraging actually to look at this budget and go, okay, it doesn't have to be super complicated. I can do a budget like this. So I thought I'd just show you that before we move on. Okay, so in the handout that I send, I'll provide links to more information about all of the different grants, and I'll include things like the feedback as well. I didn't get a chance to show you the Australia Council feedback. I'll include all of this, but basically they were saying things like, they liked that I wanted to write about disability. They think it's important to give voice to disability from a lived experience. They questioned my choice of mentor, which I was really disappointed about, because I thought my mentor was perfect, but they didn't think that my mentor fit with my artistic practice. They needed to see more detail about what the mentorship would look like, its inclusion in the timeline, and an example of the mentor's writing and the support material. So this was my very first grant application, and I left out quite a bit, so I was disappointed about it. But even though they went through all these things I'd left out, they said your application was ranked in the top third. It was a competitive application in this round. So that was very encouraging, and I thought, okay, so this is the skill set. I didn't give myself enough time. learning how to write grant applications. Next time I'll give myself more time and go through this feedback and do better next time. So don't write yourself off. Even this very imperfect grant application was ranked in the top third. So just do your best with your first application. Hope for the best, and if not, you'll get some great feedback that'll help you the next time around. Okay, so we'll have to move on from grants because we've got a few more opportunities to discuss, and I'd like to get through a few of them because they're all amazing. This next one is the Alan Marshall Short Story Award. It's run by the Nillumbik Shire Council in partnership with Writers Victoria, the ASA, and Yarra Plenty Regional Library. So it's quite, focused on a regional area, but like a lot of writing competitions run by local councils, it has an open section for all Australian writers. So this one does have an entry fee. The short story competition is $20 per entry. But there's a $2,000 prize and mentoring through the Australian Society of Authors, as well as an ASA membership. So the prize is kind of perfect for an emerging writer. They also have a youth category, which is free entry for 11 to 18-year-olds with a $200 prize. If you know some young people that might be interested in writing a short story, then send them this information. That'll all be in the handout as well. And they have a poetry competition, which is quite a specific and interesting thing. It's where you're responding to specific artworks, which you can view online, which as a disabled writer with chronic pain who finds it hard to get around, and for those of you who are in regional areas, being able to access the artwork online so that then you can write the poetry responding to it is pretty amazing. The entries for these close in April. There's a $12 entry fee for the poetry competition and a $550 prize. So this short story award and poetry award are both run by the same council, and I think they're really worth a look. The judge for the short story competition is Maxine Clark. I love Maxine's writing, and and so I'm kind of keen to enter this short story now. So short story competition now, and hopefully all of you enter it as well, and we'll flood it with stories about disability. The next one I wanted to mention is if I'm going too fast, just let me know. Has anyone got any questions about anything? I know I finished talking about grants, but if you have any questions about grants, just jump in there with the questions and I'll try and jump back and answer them. The next one I want to talk about is the Victoria University Short Story Prize for New and Emerging Writers. You don't have to be going to Victoria University to enter this one. The entries for this one open on the 1st of April. Last year, entries closed in June, so it'll probably be fairly similar this year. It's for a short story of up to 3,000 words, and the first prize is $6,000, and the second and third prize are $1,000 each. So the prizes are significant, and it's for writers with no more than one book with commercial distribution, and all three winners will be published in Overland. So I really like this one because they're focusing on early career and emerging writers. So I think if you've never entered a short story competition, this one would be a really good option. You do need to be a subscriber, I believe, for this one. So just jump online and have a look at I'll send you the link so you can jump online and have a look at the requirements for that one. I think you need to be an Overland subscriber. The next one is, again, one which is published in Overland, which is a literary publication. There are 5 $4,000 prizes for this one. It's called the Fair Australia Prize. Oh, I just had a question about grants. Is there catering for the practicalities of being a writer living with disability? That is a fantastic question. So there was a separate funding category for disabled writers through the Australia Council, I believe, and I think that's under review at the moment, but you can still apply as a writer with disability through any of the other categories. So, and certainly in my application, I wrote about being a disabled writer and included quite a bit of detail about how that affected my practice, and how it affected what I wanted to write about as well. And I think that there are if you have a look through previous winners of the previous people who've been granted grants through Australia Council and Creative Victoria and the Copyright Agency, there are disabled writers there are case studies or examples of disabled writers on the website, so that can be worth having a look at, because obviously they are willing to provide grants to disabled writers, and I'm sure they would be open to accessibility requirements or the information that you want to include about what it is like to be a writer living with disability and what you might need as part of that grant. Again, that would be a really good question to ask a grants officer as well. So don't hesitate to pick up the phone and talk to them about what your requirements are, what your practicalities are, and how best to include that information in your grant application. So I'll jump back to the Fair Australia Prize. So there are 5 $4,000 prizes. The first one is for fiction up to 3,000 words. The next one is for essays up to 3,000 words. I thought that was really interesting because I didn't see a lot of other essay prizes. Poetry up to 88 lines, and a cartoon or graphic prize. So you can win 4,000 for any of those. The entries that I read on the website are fantastic. And the Fair Australia Prize is about encouraging writers to be part of setting a new agenda for our future. How might we change our collective future? Looking at things like sustainability, fair work practices. So I would love to see, I had a look through the previous entries, I'd love to see more that talk about disability and what a better future for disabled people might look like, or for a society that's aiming to be more accessible and inclusive. So yeah, I would love to see some. Oh, sorry, someone's asked, what is the name of the one I'm talking about now? I think I need to slow down a little, sorry. So this one is called the Fair Australia Prize. So the information on that one is on the Overland Journal website. And yeah, so it's fiction, essay, poetry, and a cartoon or graphic. So there's quite a few different options there. How am I going for time? Just give me a little signal if I need. Okay, great. All right. The next one I'll talk about, again, has quite a few different categories, and this one is also perfect for emerging writers. It's the Lord Mayor's Creative Writing Awards. In 2017, the dates were 1st of May to 31st of August for applications. And this one is open to unpublished writers. They're specifically looking at unpublished writers. So an author who has not previously been published by a recognised publisher. So self-published authors can apply if they've sold less than 500 copies. And if your work has only appeared in journals, then you can also apply for this one. So if you haven't had anything published, or you've just been published in journals at this stage, then I would highly recommend applying for this one. The categories are life writing for emerging Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, up to 3,000 words. Graphic short stories submitted in hard copy, so up to 8 A4 pages. Short stories of up to 3,000 words. Poetry of up to 100 lines. A novella of between 10,000 and 20,000 words. And narrative non-fiction up to 10,000 words. There's quite a few categories. Last year there were 1,250 entries, 1,250 entries, and 118 of them were under 18. So this is a really good one for young and emerging writers. The winner of the Lord Mayor's Prize wins $10,000, but each category has a $2,000 prize. So the category winner for each of those categories will win $2,000, and then one category winner will be chosen for the overall prize of $10,000, which means they'll get $12,000 in total. So it's a significant prize. And last year, the winner of the $12,000 prize was Jack Carlyle for a narrative non-fiction piece, and the title of it, I love this, When Everything Goes to Shit for a Bit. And it was a highly personal account of his experiences with mental illness. So I highly recommend jumping online and having a look at that, having a read through. And that, again, just made me think, okay, maybe this is something, again, it's about being able to imagine what you might be able to write and get a sense of, what sort of things they're looking for. So certainly writing about disability or writing as a disabled writer and entering something into one of those categories would be really worthwhile. Okay. I'll go through a couple more. I might have to leave a few of these out, but I will make sure that I put them into the a few of these into the handout. I'll just talk about the Peter Carey Short Story Award. I wanted to mention this one because it closes on March 26th. So if you've got a short story sitting there waiting, or you've got an idea for one and you think you could finish it by the 26th of March, there is a $10 entry fee for this one. It's organised again by a council. It's the Moorabool Shire Council, but it's open to all Australian residents. It's for short stories of 2,000 to 3,000 words. The winner wins $1,000 and the runner-up wins $500, and both are published in Meanjin and get the usual contributor fee for publication. So that one's coming up quite soon. I'll just say the name of it again, the Peter Carey Short Story Award. Don't worry if you haven't been writing down the names of all of these. I will make sure that they are in the handout that we send out, so you can click through the links that I'll include in that handout. I do have some information here. Do you want to hear a little bit about a couple of journals that are specifically focused on writing by disabled writers, or did you want to have some time for questions? Anyone got some feedback on where they'd like me to go from here? Okay, okay, I'm just going to talk about them because they're so good. Okay, so this one here is the Deaf Poets Society. It's an online journal of deaf and disabled literature and art. I highly recommend jumping online. I was talking earlier with the fellowship about understanding the landscape that you're writing into and having peers within the disabled writing community, so that you can get a sense of, you know, what other people are doing and have a think about what you want to add to that. They publish poetry, prose, art, and ideas. So the ideas section is for things like reviews and interviews. So there's quite a range of things you could submit. They do only pay $15 per piece usually, depending on their level of funding at the time. So, you know, there's not a lot of money in it, but it is a really well-respected journal. And in terms of, you know, writing into a space that is just for disabled writers, you know, I think that's a really valuable thing to do at the beginning of your practice as a disabled writer. They do 4 issues per year, so you could, you know, try submitting to them a couple of times and getting that feeling of having your work published, getting a little bit of money for it, and then being able to, you know, share that online on all those social media platforms that you'll be signing up to. And the other one I wanted to mention, there are a couple out there. There's another one called Word Gathering, but I've chosen this one as the second one to speak about, called Monstering. This one is for disabled women and non-binary people, and it's about celebrating monsterhood. Maybe not everyone wants to celebrate monsterhood, but it's definitely something that speaks to me. You get paid $10 US per contribution through PayPal, and they accept writing, artwork, and audio-visual submissions. So again, not a lot of money in it, but it is, I think, really good to be aware of journals that are looking specifically for writing by disabled writers. It's not to say you shouldn't pitch and submit to other publications that aren't just looking for disabled writers. I think we need to have writing by disabled writers in so many of these journals, and, you know, it would be and a lot of them do pay more than $10 or $15 per piece of writing as well. So have a look at different publications, have a look at what their process is for pitching. Usually they'll have some information on their websites, and have a look at what they do pay their writers as well, because if you are thinking about starting freelance writing, which is something that I'm just starting to get into now, then being aware of how much you'll be paid for your time and effort is really important. Yeah. Okay, so I have skipped through a couple of things, but I think it might be good to have some time for questions now, because I did move through a lot of information in a short space of time. So has anyone got any questions? I'll just wait a minute and see if anyone sends any questions through. While I'm waiting for questions, I'll just open up this flyer. I mentioned earlier those information sessions run by Arts Access Victoria on art and the NDIS. So that flyer is here. And as you can see there, it says that they'll be held on the last Friday of every month from 1 to 3 p.m. And the dates for those sessions are up on this flyer as well. So if you can't make it to the one on the 23rd of March, then definitely try and get along to one of those if you're going to have an NDIS plan, because being informed before you get into that planning meeting is a really good idea. Someone has said, how do you stop from getting overwhelmed and confused by all the opportunities? Yeah, so having a Word document, for me, this is what works. Having a Word document with all of the things that I want to apply for is really important. and highlighting the dates. So they're bolded and then highlighted in yellow as well, the due dates for submissions. And the other thing that I do is I have a calendar open in Gmail. You might have a physical diary or something that you want to use instead. And what I do is I put in the due dates for applications, but I also put in dates for when I want to start applying. One of the things with grant writing that I should talk about actually is that you need things like letters of support for your grant applications. It can be really scary approaching someone for a letter of support. That was one of the things that kind of stopped me applying the first couple of times I started an application, because I just thought, who can I ask to do this? It's such a big deal. And one of the things I suggest doing first off, is writing a letter of support for yourself, which is a really horrible thing to do if you're like me. You hate saying nice things about yourself. I shouldn't say that. But it's a difficult process to go through writing a letter of support for yourself. But it will give you a sense of what kinds of things you might like to put into your application. And it will also give you a sense of what it might be like for someone who's writing you a letter of support. There might be someone who has written letters of support for lots of writers before, or they might never have written one before. I had never written one. I had never done a letter of support, and I was asked to do one recently for another writer. And I was quite intimidated. And so they gave me some information about the kinds of things that they thought might be useful to mention in the letter. And so I used some of those and wrote about it in my own way, and then added some extra things. Once I got into the flow of writing the letter and I thought, okay, I'm mentioning the things that are important, then I was able to add more information about how much I loved their writing and you know, when I first read their work and that sort of thing. So yeah, if you are asking someone to write a letter of support, and you know it's something that they're doing in their own free time, they may not know how to do it. It might be a bit intimidating, so try and give them some support and some information. Try writing your own letter of support just as a good exercise in terms of thinking about your practice and you know what you want to put into your application, but that might also help you to talk to the person you're approaching about this letter, about what kinds of things might need to be in there. And have a think about you know, if you're given the opportunity to provide a number of letters, what kinds of writers or organisations or peers or support people might be useful. One of my applications, I had a letter of support from Writers Victoria, so that was really good because I'd done the fellowship and they were able to speak to what I'd done as part of my Rideability Fellowship in that application. The person who approached me to write a letter is a YA writer, and I was involved with the Lovers Way committee, so I was writing it in support of them as someone who's kind of involved in the YA community as a reader and as someone on this committee. So yeah, so have a think about who your connections are, and you know, and who knows your work and who knows you as a writer or knows something about your practice. And then get them to write you a letter of support. Think about what's relevant to your application too. So if I was writing an application to work on some poetry, I might have a think about connections that I have within the poetry community, or I might think about how, you know, I'm trying to make an impact in terms of increasing disability representation in poetry. So I might find an organisation that works with disabled writers and get them to talk about the importance of disability representation. So yeah, have a think about exactly what it is that you're wanting the support to be, what you're wanting it to say about your application, what you're wanting it to add to your application, because I think that part of the application is one of the things that takes the most time. Make sure you give the people that you're asking to write a letter of support plenty of time. I have been the person who rings the day before and says, can I have a letter of support by tomorrow? It's not a nice thing to ask, and it's not a nice thing to be asked. So try and give yourself enough time to write the application, but also give the support people who are writing those letters enough time to write them. And that's been one of the biggest lessons I've learned when applying for grants. Okay, I've got a question here. Is there a way to attend the Arts Access sessions remotely? I'm not sure, and I'm not sure, it doesn't say whether they're recorded or not. So there is, hold on, let's see. For more info and to RSVP down here, we've got an email address. I don't know if you can see that. I'll try and zoom in a bit on this one. Okay, so the number for Arts Access is 8640 6009, and there's an email address there as well. So just get in touch with them and see whether they have any options in terms of recording or logging in remotely. Someone else has asked, what's freelance writing and what's the difference between that and normal writing? That's a good question. So I might have used some terms during this webinar that that you're not familiar with. So just let me know if there's anything you want me to go over. Freelance writing is where you're not employed by a publication to write regularly for them. And so you're, kind of just writing off your own bat. You're writing maybe at home or, in your spare time, or maybe you're doing it full time or around parenting. And so freelancing kind of gives you the freedom to write what you like, when you like, and you pitch it to various publications. You don't have to pitch to the same publications. You can write on any topic, any publication, but you're not committed to one particular organisation or employer. So there's a lot of freedom in it, but it can be difficult to get paid on time, difficult to get paid enough, difficult to get your work accepted, depending on what you're writing about. So it's not easy. It takes time to build up a career as a freelance writer. I do have friends who are doing it, and yeah, and it is an amazing thing to do, and some of them do make a career out of it. But yeah, that's what freelance writing is. I hope that description is okay. And there's one other question here. Do you need to write about disability for the Rideability Fellowship, or just live with one? I don't think you need to write about disability. No, you don't need to write about disability. You just need to be a disabled writer. So for me, I did want to write about disability. For Mary, she's writing a YA novel that has disabled characters, but the main thing is that you're a disabled writer. So you could be writing anything at all. It's about supporting emerging disabled writers in their practice. So no, you don't. Are there any other questions? I think we might need to wrap up in a minute. So I'll just wait and see if anyone else has any other questions. I love that question about how you stop from being overwhelmed by opportunities. It's a good problem to have. Maybe just pick one or two first off. I think that's a good way to do it. Maybe pick one grant and one competition and one fellowship that you want to apply for. All right, I'll just wait. I don't think there are any other questions coming through. No, I think that's it. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here today. Thanks for holding on while we dealt with some technical issues at the beginning of the webinar. This webinar will be available. It's being recorded, so it'll be available for you to look at later. And there'll be a handout which is sent out to everyone. If you have any questions at all, or you'd like to get in touch with me, I'm on Twitter like half of the time while I'm writing. So my Twitter handle is @Jess Healy, H-E-A-L-Y, Walton, W-A-L-T-O-N. So you can find me on Twitter, or you can email me at jessicahealywalton@gmail.com. And I'll include those contact details in the handout that goes out to participants as well. So yeah, feel free to, I was talking about networking with other writers, so network with me. I'd love to know some other disabled writers who are taking part in the webinar today. Thank you so much for coming, and yeah. Bye.